Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this special webinar. I'm Eli Klutstein, the press coordinator of the JPC. Before we begin, I'd like to share the club's condolences for the passing away of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Today, we mark 21 years since the horrific attack by Al-Qaeda on the United States, a country which recently held deep negotiations to finalize a second nuclear deal with Iran, a state sponsor of terror. In Jerusalem, meantime, leaders are closely following these developments while pushing through an election campaign that might lead to the formation of a government stable enough to deal with the numerous security, diplomatic, social, and economic challenges ahead. Today, the Jerusalem Press Club is honored to host one of Israel's most prominent voices, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, to share with us his view on these issues. Barak is joining us now from New York. Barak was the 10th Prime Minister of Israel between 1999 and 2001, as leader of the Labour Party. He held numerous ministerial posts, most notably Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and as Deputy Prime Minister. He was also the IDF 14th Chief of Staff and served as head of the Planning Directorate, head of the Intelligence Directorate, commander of the Central Command, and as Deputy Chief of Staff. Mr. Barak, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Please.
Now it's my turn to talk?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first of all, I'm glad to be here with you. I hope that more of you will join along the discussion or probably get the record of it. I will try to summarize in probably 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes. I hope that I'll stand within those constraints and let you ask questions about whatever you are interested in, even beyond what I'm already discussed. I'll try to focus on two issues. One is the coming election, what it is about, and second, the Iran situation in regard to the JCPOA and so on. So in regard to the election, we are facing the fifth one in 2.5 years. It's highly emotional, but more important, it's crucial for our future. What is at stake is we have to make a decision. Are we going to remain a united family where you might have debates, but you remain one family, or will we drift into toxic intra-family hatred of the type that already lead us to destruction deep backward in history more than once. It's a choice between leadership with integrity, commitment to the public, a healthy national sentiment built on our achievements, on our potential, and our future contribution to the world and to the region, or alternatively, ultra-nationalism combined with corruption and messianism. We are about to decide whether we believe in giving the public hope and trust in spite of all obstacles along the way that should be overcome, or to find ourselves under the dark shadow of a big lie, deeply dipped in personal cult, which already set his objective on distracting the institutions of our democracy and the two pillars upon these type of regime stands, which are truth and trust. I think that basically the many issues will be delayed. The real issue now is how to shape the defining line or dividing line within the public. And I propose that instead of putting it between right and left or conservatives and liberals or whatever, to do it a different way, to define a line among all these who believe in normative government, rational, dealing with the interests of the public, not the interests of the people in power, or personal interests of people in power, and to put this line between all right and left and Arabs or Jews or religious or non-religious, all those who believe in a normative, normal government, and put on the other side of the line the inner, I don't know how to call it, faction around Netanyahu, it's called the Bibism here in Israel, and their unholy alliance with racist, extreme kind of religious messianic types like Ben-Gvir and his party, people who are the intellectual and ideological successors of Rabbi Kahana of the past. I still remember as a younger person that even right-wing leader like Shamir used to go out of the Knesset Assembly Hall whenever this guy Kahana went to the podium. And now Netanyahu basically kind of legitimized Ben-Gvir and all these group around him. I think that basically we know what will happen if Netanyahu wins, and no one can know who will win. I would give 25% of chance to any of the following development. Either Netanyahu wins 61, 25%, that Lapid and Gantz together will have 61 and be able to establish a government. Third possibility is that in spite of neither side reach 61, somehow a government will be created where both, let's say, Gantz and Netanyahu, probably in a secondary role, will join hands. I hope it won't happen. I think there are good reasons for this not to happen, but I cannot ignore the possibility that it will happen after all. And of course, the possibility, the last possibility is that we will end up with election number 6 or probably number 7 later on. And I think that this is the real issue. What we are facing now is a situation where even a leading right-wing journalist named Kalman Lipskind tried to describe what we are facing, and he said the problem with Netanyahu, his cult, and the Messianic group behind him is that they do not wish to win the debate. They wish to avoid its very possibility. They want to vanish the possibility of having any genuine debate among us. And we know exactly, in spite of everything that we will hear along the election campaign itself, we know what will be the next step if Netanyahu will win. He now hides its more vocal kind of supporters cannot control themselves and they tell the truth. So first of all, the first step will be legislating a rule that enable the Knesset to overrule the decisions of the Supreme Court. Second will be the firing of the general attorney, nominate some strawman instead of him, who will follow any instruction for the prime minister office. Number 3 is to change the rules so that politicians, basically the government, will nominate in court judges. That's the rule in America, but you have to realize that we have a different situation. We don't have a constitution. There are no rules or framework to what they can judge, and under this situation, let politicians decide the identity of Supreme Court judges could lead to total destruction of the law enforcement and judicial branch. And the 4th step will be to stop or delay forever his trial. And that's just the beginning. After this, we will drift into autocracy. Of course, not Putin-like autocracy or Erdogan-like, but quiet, probably Orban-like, like in Hungary, or Kaczynski, like in Poland. Now, these are all bad news, but of course there are good news. The good news is Israel is still the strongest country, 1,000 miles around Jerusalem, both militarily, strategically, technologically, economically. We're not the biggest economy in the region, but by far the most vibrant one, most advanced one. And even if we manage reasonable relationship with the administration in Washington, D.C. We have the American diplomatic safety net and the massive and stable financial support to keep the qualitative military edge of the IDF. Our economy is very strong, very successful, in spite of all kind of quantitative easing was not that dramatic here in Israel. We still have a much lower kind of rate of GDP to debt, or debt to GDP, than most of other advanced societies. Inflation is relatively low. The central bank has huge dollar reserves. In fact, we are in a kind of situation where the state is rich and the citizens are under stress. The reason is that along the last decade or so, the government privatized most of the services that, at least under the European or Scandinavian model, are provided by the government. There is great negligence in issues like education, health, public transportation, and accommodation, so apartments or houses. That's basically about our situation here. I want to make just few remarks on Iran, because I sent you a long article that I wrote several weeks ago to the site of Time magazine. I think the following, we're asking ourselves about the agreement. So remember that almost 9 months ago, Tony Blinken already said that if it won't be signed within weeks, probably there will be no reason to sign it. Then a lot of time had been passed, and at least in the last 6 weeks, probably almost 2 months, there is no inspection whatsoever in Iran. So we cannot know where they are. I strongly believe that during this summer, they became de facto threshold nuclear power. They probably will need a year or year and a half to complete certain elements of treating with metal uranium or building a warhead for a missile that has a limited diameter. You can do it very kind of clumsily. You have to have certain sophistication, but they are very sophisticated. This could be executed in a small lab about the size of the apartment here around me, and could be easily buried in very deep tunnel beyond the reach of any weapon. It was a grave mistake in retrospect from Netanyahu to encourage or almost prod Trump into leaving this agreement. It allowed the Iranians to move much faster. In 2018, we were probably some 18 months from, Iran was 18 months from becoming a threshold nuclear state. Now they are probably 18 days, and probably they're already there, and we just don't know about it. And that's quite pity for unexplainable reasons. Neither Netanyahu, probably not even Trump, prepared a plan B, where you can destroy or delay by several years the Iranian nuclear effort if worse come to worse and they try to break out. This is an operation could not be prepared in few months. It takes years for sure to Israel, but also to America. It's not something of a few months or weeks. And more tragic that when they are too close to it, no type of surgical operation could stop them. To tell the truth, I believe that it's not very important whether an agreement will be signed or not signed. I personally do not believe that it will be signed before the midterm election in the United States, but probably I'm wrong. It doesn't matter because nowadays it does not influence the situation of Iran. The Iranians themselves will decide when and if and how to turn into nuclear power. But even if they are already what's called the threshold nuclear state, they will prefer, quite probably, almost surely, to remain members of the NPT and not admitting that they had turned into de facto or they turned into threshold nuclear power. That's for reasons that has to do with the sanction and why to admit it, why to do it. And for Americans, it's better to have an agreement in order not to face much tougher choices that stems out of the situation that Iran, like North Korea in the past, turned itself into a nuclear power. So, and yet it's of a marginal importance, but still there is certain edge of having an agreement. Reason for this is the following. You know, exactly like North Korea, which did not acquire a nuclear arsenal in order to drop a bomb on South Korea, on Japan, on Americans in Guam or Okinawa. It's done in order to protect the longevity and survivability of their own regime and give them more room for maneuvering in the region. The reason is that they are extremists, but they are not stupid, and no one wants to turn his country back into the Stone Age. And for the same reasons, the real risk with Iran, if and when they will decide to turn into nuclear power, not just threshold state, is not about dropping a bomb on Israel. For the same reasons, they don't want to, they are extremists, they are fanatics, they don't want to turn into, or turn back to the Iran into the Stone Age kind of country. But it's about protecting their own regime, making sure that no one will ever intervene in their internal kind of chances to keep controlling the situation. And they will have much more freedom to for insurgency, for intervention all around the wider Middle East through proxies or even directly, being protected by these deterrents of nuclear capability or assumed nuclear capability. So the real risk is that the NPT will collapse. And as once David Turlu in Turkey told me, what choices we have. If you look at the map and the history, and you will understand that if Iran turns nuclear, Turkey will have no choice but to turn nuclear. So Turkey is a member of NATO. Probably a solution for that could be found. But then there is Egypt and there is Saudi Arabia, and all of them will try to turn nuclear. And once and if they succeed in turning nuclear, not being somehow convinced not to do it, that will open the gate for any second-grade dictator to turn nuclear. A different landscape will be created, much more dangerous in the sense that has been mentioned by Professor Graham Ellison at Harvard in his book, Nuclear Terror. A generation later, you might find a nuclear crude device in the hands of terrorist group, and they don't have this kind of constraint that a state leader has, even if they are rogue ones. And so it's bad development. It's not the end of the world. Israel is prepare itself in spite of our successful, what we call Begin doctrine. We destroyed an Iraqi nuclear reactor in '81. We destroyed the Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007. but Israel is preparing itself for 2 generations now to the situation that, in spite of all our efforts, in spite of world resistance, a certain neighbor in the inner circle around or the second circle will turn nuclear. And without diving into details, we are well prepared to whatever could happen. It's clearly a change, a dramatic change for the worse, if and risk the stability of the whole region if Iran will turn nuclear, and it still justify any effort to avoid it, but it's not simple. In fact, the only effective step that America can take is to issue an immediately a kind of tough ultimatum to dismantle this plan, backed by a credible threat of a wide scale war against Iran. I don't see any American president, this one or the next one in 2024, or the same one in 2024, who will take such a kind of decision. It was last taken against, under different situations, against Serbia by Clinton and Blair, and within 78 days of bombing, Serbia changed its view about reality. So it could be done, but it's probably, it's a clearly unrealistic kind of trajectory of development. So that's for my remarks. I hope it's not too long, and I'm ready to answer whatever questions you have.
Okay, thank you for this very interesting introduction. We have one question from Taichi from NHK, the Japanese television, and he's asking about the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA, and he's asking, simply saying, do you think that this decision was a failure in terms of Israeli security?
The decision in 2018?
2020.
I think it was a great mistake, even from anyone else point of view, because we have to understand, by America leaving, it doesn't cancel the agreement. The agreement is there. The agreement is there. The Russians are there, Chinese are there, the Europeans are there. So basically, the only immediate result is it enabled Iran to break it here and there, to go outside of the constraints, and whenever the other partners would blame them of breaking it and say, "Oh, don't joke with us." The ones who really broke it were your American friends. But I'm not in a position to judge American administrations. I'm in a position to judge ours. I cannot understand under whatever manipulation or mental gymnastics the logic behind what our prime minister had done in engaging so actively the American administration to leave it. What exactly he hoped to happen, and why the hell didn't we prepare any plan B for the case that the Iranians will change their minds along the way and break out?
Okay, let's combine the two issues you talked about. So we have the upcoming elections now, and we would like to know, do you think that this issue specifically and the way Israel dealt with the negotiations the Americans had with the Iranians will come up as part of the elections and might be used at some of the parties? We have one party which is combined of, former generals. And in general, maybe you can tell us, how do you view the current relationship between the administration and Israel?
I think that it won't be a major issue on the election. I think that all the participants try to impress the public that they are very tough on Iran and so on. The problem is that there's not a lot of substance behind those kind of relatively high rhetoric. It's clear that both Israel and for sure the United States can send their air force to hit this or that target inside Iran. But that has nothing to do with the Iran nuclear program, because what is needed for the Iran nuclear program is a plan, surgical plan, that can delay them by several years. This was contemplated in Israel and was not executed for whatever reasons some 11 years ago, and could be contemplated 4 years ago, but following the consequences of leaving the agreement and the recent development of dragging feet about signing this agreement made it almost irrelevant, because neither America nor Israel has now the option of launching a surgical limited operation that can delay the nuclear program of Iran for several years. And without having such an operation, another ineffective attack inside Iran might, especially if it's aimed at a nuclear installation, might have the opposite consequence, namely it might accelerate the Iranian ride toward a nuclear capability, while they will argue, what the hell you expect us? We have our peace nuclear plant, that's the way they call it, and you unleash your nuclear dog in the Middle East, namely Israel, against us. You don't leave us with any option but to develop our own nuclear capability. It might accelerate rather than slow it down. So, with all due respect to the great intention and with the sober understanding of the realities, I would say that an agreement is still slightly better than having no agreement, because it keeps at least the NPT in place and slow down the collapse of the NPT. And that in this regard, it will be dealt with seriously only after election, both election in Israel and midterm election in the United States. So basically, I think that our government, the government of the last year under Bennett and now for a few months under Lapid, I believe it's much better, running much better everything, including the relation with the administration in the United States, than the previous one under Netanyahu that behaved in a way that combined high rhetoric and clumsiness in action.
Now, you mentioned the possibility of a deadlock in the political arena, maybe a sixth election round, maybe seventh even. So we have this deadlock, and we know your opinion about a government formed by Netanyahu. But from the other hand, the other side isn't capable of forming a stable government that holds for long. And we know that 25% of Israelis voted for the Likud. So what is actually the solution?
No, the solution in the coming 50 days to make a serious effort to make sure that Bibi Netanyahu is removed out of the political arena. If he stays there, he will keep doing the same. He's basically lost any constraints and he's quite desperate. He well knows that in Israel, 97% of court cases end up with punishment, with a verdict that the guy is guilty. And he has 3 of them together, so he probably have less than 1% chance of winning. And it's clear to him, might find himself in jail or under very humiliating plea case. So he doesn't see anything. He doesn't see anything but his own interest in get out of this situation, and that's blind his judgment. And even the opening very good. It's quite deeply narcissist kind of personality. So it's not easy to him to detach himself psychologically and see the picture that it is, what's needed, what's proper, what's not. I think it's very urgent to remove it from the arena, but as I mentioned earlier, at least half of the probability of 1 to 2, the result will have him in government, either leading it or being part of it, and that's, I believe, very bad. But I'm basically optimist. You know, if Bibi wins election, we will enter into a dark period, probably of 2 years, probably of 4 years, I don't know. it's a dark period, but we will come out of it. The only question is how long it will take and what will be the price to be paid by the whole nation along the way.
Okay, and we have another question from a journalist. How do you explain the fact that the current government, the PM, the defense minister, the alternate PM, continued Netanyahu's policy with regard to Iran, both with regard to the withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018 and to any other renewed deal which they still oppose?
It's not, I don't think it's a politics, it's not policy. With Netanyahu, it's policy based on ideology and kind of historiography that describe the world through catastrophes, which I don't believe in, but he believes in this kind of worldview. For his opponent, it's just tactic for election. It has nothing to do with their beliefs. It caught them with the election very close, and it was the longest campaign in history in Israel. It's very long, almost 5 months. So along the way, they probably believe that they cannot convince people through action or through speeches to change their sentiment. Sentiment is anti-Iranian for good reasons. People want to see a strong government. So that's the wording they found to it. It has nothing to do with genuine policy for the longer term. And basically, in regard to Iran, the objective is common to all of us, to delay Iran as far as possible, and to the extent physically possible to block them from turning into nuclear power. The problem, of course, that there is a difference between what you wish and what you can execute, and this kind of gap had to be treated by the next government.
Okay, let's move on to an issue that we didn't talk about yet, maybe. What have you been hearing in the US about the likelihood of a maritime agreement between Israel and Lebanon? And what do we know that Hezbollah might try to do? Maybe this whole thing will explode into a new war.
I think that's a solvable issue. I think that the American Representative Hochstein is a capable and, according to what I'm hearing, very kind of in full control of the slightest details, both political and technical and judicial, international law. So I think that it should be solved. I think that Hezbollah might try to torpedo it, but there is a limit to how far they can do, because the price for them will be quite heavy if they dragging Lebanon under its present situation, which is very bad, very poor, into a full clash with Israel. I hope he will be clever enough not to do it. Technically, he can try. We try to protect this kind of production site. And in the longer term, you can also take a pipe from the hole in the seabed and bring it much closer to the border of Israel. It's not, with modern technique, it's very kind of something you see very often in bigger gas or oil fields, that you drag a pipe from the hole on the bed of the sea and break it to something much less controversial or crucial. I think that a part of it, probably of this field, probably goes into the Lebanese area. So probably Lebanon as well will get some gas from this field, another part of this field, or from another field that they might discover. Just recently, Egypt discovered a huge gas reserve in front of their fields, and basically the Eastern Mediterranean is a place where there is a gas under the sea.
Okay, so this talk is a bit extending, and we're sorry if it takes too much time, but we have more questions from reporters. And one of them is asking, after the 2017 May incident in which Trump betrayed an Israeli intel asset, are you concerned that Trump now...
Which incident? Repeat it, please.
That he
after the...
he talked about an intelligence asset, and everyone knew about it afterwards. So are we concerned that now, after we see what happened in Mar-a-Lago with all the documents the FBI have seized, maybe that we have some concern that maybe he betrayed any more Israeli national security secrets?
I don't think that I'm in a position or should be kind of an authority of criticizing the behavior of American former presidents or the activities of the law enforcement agencies of the present administration. So I don't think that it's proper for me to enter into it, for sure, under what the very little we know as of now.
Okay. We have another question concerning the political arena. Considering the political situation in Israel, which is leaning right, like represented by Ben-Gvir, do you think there will be still possibility that the peace talk will be resumed?
I think
that, with the Palestinians?
As I've mentioned earlier, I think that the main purpose and it's still, the voters are still out. They will decide only the 1st of November. I think that there is a great opportunity now to isolate both the personality cult sect Bibi and the messianic racist successors of Rabbi Kahana, and make sure that they are not in power. And then it won't be easy because, most of the responsibility for absence of political process with Palestinians is still on the shoulders of the Palestinian leadership, even Abu Mazen. And of course, the Hamas, which always try to derail the process. I am confident that Israel should adopt a policy which is clear, not because of justice for the Palestinians, but because of our own future and identity. Between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, there live now 14 million people, about 9 million, 9.5 million Israelis and 4.5 million Palestinians. But inside Israel, there are already almost kind of 1.8 million of Israeli Arabs, which are honest citizens, but their political leaders somehow feel that they are kind of identify with the Palestinians' objective. So if we have it as a vision and only one political entity reigning over this whole area from River Jordan to Mediterranean, it will become inevitably, that's the key word, inevitably, either non-Jewish or non-democratic. Because if this block of millions of Palestinians, I mean those who are outside of Israel, if this block of millions of Palestinians, which live in Gaza Strip and in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, if they can vote, that's a binational state overnight, because there are already some 4 millions, and within very short time, probably less than a decade, it will become a binational state with a Muslim majority. That's not the Zionist dream. And if those blocks of millions cannot vote in the long term, not in this election, if we kind of annex the whole area and they cannot vote, that's not a democracy. I don't want to use the name of the previous experience in the neighboring continent. But it's not a democracy. And that's not the Zionist dream either. So we have to insist on the long-term objective of separating disengagement from the Palestinian, not because of the justice. They also deserve it for other reasons, but we need it because of our own identity, our own future, our own security, and the deepest interests of the Israeli entity. So it means that we have to be able to master the political and political will and influence, convince our public at the right moment, because it's true that while we're speaking, it's not still the right moment for many technical and profound reasons. But a moment will come, and we should never lose sight of the objective. Objective is to delineate a line within the Holy Land in a way that this line will include probably 80 or 85% of the settlers and all our strategic interests, and yet allow enough area on the other side in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip for a viable demilitarized Palestinian state. We'll have to connect them. In the past, we sort of overfly. Now it's much easier or making more sense to dig a 30 miles tunnel with 6 lanes for cars and whatever they need, desalinated water, a gas pipe, and electricity cables to connect the two parts of it. And we have to work to this vision. The reason is that if you don't have, there is an ancient Greek saying that if you don't know which port you want to reach, no wind will take you there. If we don't have a clear vision of the end game, we won't be able to zigzag and maneuver among the obstacles in a way that will bring us there. And we need it, as I mentioned, for our own interest in order to protect the Zionist movement. When you ask right-wingers and those Messianic guys, what do you expect? How will you avoid this inevitable kind of contradiction with reality that I have just described? They always look to heaven. They expect some divine intervention that will evaporate the Palestinians and create, once again, the conditions where you can throw them out of areas under our control, which, in my judgment, it's unrealistic. And if someone will try to do it, it will end up at The Hague for good reasons.
Okay, so maybe just last one question. How do you view the Labour Party, which you were its leader in the past, today? And do you see any leadership to the left today in Israeli politics? And maybe on the same note, do you plan a comeback? Do you see yourself in Israeli politics again?
I wish for all success for the Labour Party. I would love to see them uniting, but I can understand why they say if both leaders are confident that will not end up under the threshold of acceptance, which is about 3%. If both of them are sure that they are not there, it's better for them to go independently. But if in the coming 4 days there is a situation where one of them might fall underneath the threshold, it's too risky for the whole project of isolating the Messianics and the personality cult of Netanyahu and win the election. So it's up to their judgment. I don't have here in New York, I don't have the details of the last polling or any other measures of the situation. I think that it's in a way, it's something that on the shoulders of Lapid, he probably has certain tools or leverages to make sure that they feel secure if they unite and not feel abandoned if they don't. And let's hope that all will work. It's about 50 days, we will know. And about myself, I'm not participating in any kind of formal way in this election. I don't plan. I hope that they will win, and there will be no need for me to consider to come back. I cannot promise you what will happen if we will kind of find ourselves facing a 7th or 8th or 10th election. Political crisis might stretch long way, and I will do whatever I can to help the country to go out of it.
This is very interesting, and this was a very interesting talk. And as much as we want to go on, our time is up. So thank you everyone for joining us for this special webinar. And thank you again, Mr. Barak, for joining us from New York. Good evening and take care.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.